The coronavirus, Joe Biden, oil prices tanked. A lot of people were asking me about that today, and I started trying to think about doing a video on each, and then I thought that would be silly. I don't know that I have a video's worth of stuff to say about every one of those topics, so I figured I would just kind of do a question and answer video. It's been a few weeks since I did one, and go over these topics. Yeah, a couple. You should know that I don't follow the price of oil like on a daily basis, so it's not like, I mean, it was people coming to me and saying, "Hey, did you hear about this?" And it just goes with the territory. The oil industry has always been very cyclical like this. It's gone up and downs. I've gone through at least one and a half, maybe two cycles already in my career. And the news today, while dramatic, it's too short term to even say if it's going to make a big difference. It could be very significant, but I tend not to get. You have to understand that oil companies are making very long-term bets, and they're not going to change too much based on something that happened in a single day. But let's see, make sure this is uploading right. Boo, boo, boo. All right, looks like it's good. We are live. So if you are watching, go ahead and leave a comment just so that I know that it's working. The stream just started, so I may not know what's going on. Boom. But yeah, so apparently Russia and Saudi Arabia got into an argument. The Saudis have a long history of this. Um, there's, I don't know if there's a term for this. Hey, Jared, I thought you'd be here. You said you would. I don't know if there's a term for this, but when you have a cartel, when you have a group of companies that are trying to coordinate their activities and price fix, which is, one of the problems people think is a huge issue with free markets. Um, sure, check. It's not political. It's about AFATLIOKL. Um, so the the problem with the cartel and a free market is that the various companies that form a cartel don't all produce at the same, they're not all equally efficient, right? So you have 10 companies in the cartel, and let's say one or two of them are going to be the most efficient out of those 10, and two or three of them are going to be the least efficient out of those 10. The more efficient of those companies could actually gobble up a larger market share, all right? So if they agree to set the price of oil at $100 a barrel, some of those companies could lower it to say $90 a barrel, and yes, they'd make less per barrel, but their market share would increase enough that they'd actually have higher profits. They'd have a larger volume. And so the problem when cartels formed in a market economy, which there were many, many attempts to form cartels, especially things like railroads and oil, they really didn't work because the more competitive members of that cartel would have a strong profit incentive to cheat the cartel and to undercut their cooperating cartels. And this is the interesting thing: is the enemies of capitalism will say over and over and over again, the only thing that capitalists care about, the only thing that a company cares about is profits. They don't care about the consumers. They don't care about anything else but profits. Okay, well, that's all that it takes for this to happen, because the more efficient of the companies is going to say, we could make more outside the cartel than within the cartel because we're the most efficient of the companies. So then they would come, the socialists, the anti-capitalists will then come and argue, oh, no, no, in a cartel, profits isn't the number one thing. The most important thing is the solidarity of the cartel, and they will, the richest, J.P. Morgan or John D. Rockefeller, they actually don't want to make as much money as possible. They want to screw consumers more than they want to make money, and so they won't break the cartel. Of course, this is ridiculous. There's a couple instances of this where socialists will make inverted claims about capitalism. So, it's cutthroat competition, and yet it's going to be cartels all the time, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So we don't have, with things like OPEC and these other countries, we do have a similar situation where we have a lot of countries that produce a lot of oil. It's not equally distributed over the globe. This is something that Thomas Sowell talks a lot about. We don't have a homogeneous distribution of any resources, whether we're talking about oil or gold or anything. across the globe, or even things like warm water ports or fresh water or anything like that. And so it's not like every country has its average allocation or its proportional allocation of hydrocarbon. They're unevenly spread across the globe. And as everyone knows, the Middle East and the Persian Gulf has a huge share of that. The United States has a huge share of that. Russia has a big share of this. Uh, Canada, Mexico, and Norway also have a big share of this. And uh, the problem is that on the open market, whichever one can produce the cheapest is going to set the price, right? So if your country can produce oil at $150 a barrel and another country can produce it at $100 a barrel, nobody's going to buy your oil. Everyone's going to buy the $100. So you have to find a way to bring it down to that price. So the Saudis, uh, so okay, we'll get to the comments in a minute. But so the Saudis have a history because they can produce oil very cheaply. There, I'm not up on all the details about this, but I think when their crude comes out, it needs the least amount of refining. That's another thing, is the quality of hydrocarbons isn't the same everywhere. If you look at something like an oil sands from, say, Canada, there's a lot of oil there that's a valuable resource, but it's very expensive to refine that. You have other places where oil can come out of the ground almost ready to put in your car, or with very little refining. And so I believe that's the case with Saudi Arabia. Is not only do they have a large supply, they have a large supply that has ready access to markets and is pretty close to being ready to be refined really cheaply. So they have a way to set the price. And if you're familiar at all with the lead up to the first Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, this was probably the main cause. After the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted for 8 to 9 years in the 80s, Saddam Hussein was very poor, was in a lot of debt that he actually owed to the other Saudi, like the other Persian Gulf states like Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, Saudi Arabia. And he said, look, you guys are all Sunnis. I just fought this long war against the Shiites. I suffered 1 million casualties. I went into debt. It was a big deal, and I basically did it for your benefit. So, in order to help me pay back the loans, what I would like is for the price of oil to go up. And I think he was asking for, I think, $25 a barrel. Would have been like 1990, and the Saudis didn't want that. The Saudis said, "Well, you can say whatever you want, but we want it to be more like $19 a barrel." And they ended up doing that. And Saddam said, okay, if I can't make back the money with a higher oil price, I'll make back the money by just taking up a larger market share, i.e., taking Kuwait. There were other things to it. He said that there were disputes. The Kuwaitis, apparently some legitimate disputes about mineral rights with Kuwait. That wasn't the only thing. But the main thing was this was a way of evening the score. So the Saudis have a long history of this. Well, they're doing it again with the Russians. So one thing is people associate these oil sheikdoms of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the Persian Gulf states. Everyone knows that their wealth is based on oil and that oil is a huge part of their economy and that they don't have a lot else going on. They're trying to diversify. Some of them have done an okay job, but as of right now, they're not going to have a booming economy based on camels or date palms or investment yet. This may change at some point, but it's not the case now. I think what a lot of people fail to realize is there's a couple other countries. This is also true. This is true in Norway. Right, most of the budget of the Norwegian government is paid for by its oil revenues, and this is also true in Russia. Okay, Russia is one of the leading producers of oil. At various times in history, it has been the largest producer of oil, and the Russian state is basically funded by these oil sales and the way it's run. There aren't really many other competitive industries in Russia, which is crazy because Russia is a huge country with vast resources, right? It has a lot of gold, has a lot of zinc, it has a lot of uranium, it has a lot of timber, it has a lot of furs. And up there on the shelf back there, we've got Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development by Anthony C. Sutton, which is a wonderful series of books. And he talks about how at the end of the Soviet era, if you looked at, and people always call the Soviet Union a superpower, and they called the United States a superpower, but if you looked at the exports of the two countries, there was a huge disparity because the Americans, I mean, we do export a lot of things, like we do export a lot of food. We are actually right now the leading producer of oil, but we consume almost all of that for domestically, so we're not a big exporter of oil, although we do export some. Um, but we're also exporting cars, we're exporting computers, we're exporting airplanes, There's a lot of high-tech quality stuff that gets exported from the United States. If you look at the Soviet Union, yes, they have these bilateral trade deals with Soviet bloc countries. So, yes, they were shipping out AK-47s and MiG-17s and tanks, but the cars that they were manufacturing there, nobody wanted to buy. The civilian aircraft they were manufacturing there, nobody wanted to buy. Their number one export was oil, and number two was lumber, and number three was animal furs, which is not the trade pattern you would think of a superpower that covered, I think, what is it, a third of the surface area or a sixth of the surface area of the globe, and has all these natural resources. There's lots of natural resources where Russia and the Soviet Union especially was one or two or three, listed in terms of world providers. So the Russian state is heavily, heavily dependent on oil revenues, and so the higher the price of oil is, the better it is for that state. If the price of oil goes down 20%, it's fair to say that revenue for the Russian state also goes down 20%. So in the United States, the energy sector is a big, powerful sector. It's a big part of the economy, especially in places like Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Louisiana, North Dakota, Alaska. It's a big deal, but it's not the only show in town. The United States has a lot more going for it. There's big parts of the United States where energy isn't a thing at all. There's big parts where even in Texas, there's other things going on. So while it might cause problems for the stock market for a day, and while some investors might lose money, and while it's certainly not good for people like me, my income year to year does tend to correlate fairly well with oil prices. So like lower oil prices isn't necessarily good for my bottom line, but it's good for everybody else. And the United States will prosper with low oil prices. The lower energy costs are, the lower it is to ship everything, the lower it is to produce everything, the lower it is for you at the pump, the lower it is for you to heat your house, the lower it's good for everybody except for the sector of the economy that is the energy sector, and that's just a small part of the economy, unlike the case in the Gulf states or in Russia. And you can see this if you ever watch RT. Russia will oftentimes make like anti-fracking videos, or they really were upset by the fact that we were getting so much more production in the United States. Where this really hurt. Not does Russia really care about the environment? No, of course not. But I mean, I guess you could say that they want global warming because Russia's so cold, and it would be nice if Russia had a Mediterranean climate. But that's not the. I don't think that's the extent of their game. But I do think that it really, really hurts them to have oil prices go down. I don't know if the Saudis are doing it to hurt them. They could be trying to just squeeze out their competitors, right? If they're the most, just like in a capitalist economy, if you have a more efficient provider, they can saturate the market. They can drive out some of their least competitive competitors and take up that much more of the market share. I don't know if that's what the Saudis are doing on purpose. They could just need more revenue themselves, right? They could look at it totally like this is the bottom line. We want to increase production so that we can make more money now, so we have more to invest in other plants. I'm not sure if that's it, but I think this is good for everyone who's not in the energy sector, and in the United States, that's the vast majority of people. And so I think this is good for the United States, even if it's bad for Russia. It's definitely bad for Russia. And it's even, Putin's dictatorship is kind of dependent on him being in charge of the state and then dispensing state jobs. And there aren't any big industries in Russia that aren't either directly or indirectly controlled by the state. Everything is basically, very gangster-esque, where you might nominally not be part of the government, but if you're not, integrated within their spoil system, you're not going to be independent. So if his base shrinks, it's just like a mafia don. If he loses 10% of the drug market, he can't afford as many henchmen. He's in a more precarious position, and I think this is the case with somebody like Putin. So it's bad for Russia, but it's not bad for the United States, even if it's bad for me. Okay, sorry, I will get back to these comments now. I'm going to be honest with you, Chief. So this is from Jolly Crocodile. So I wasn't ignoring you, Jolly. I just wanted to finish my thoughts on oil before I took comments. So uh, let's see. I think most people just don't like the idea of a voluntary and merit-based system. Perfect capitalism or whatever just isn't attractive to most. That may be true. That doesn't mean that that's not going to be the system that we have. Most people defer to what's happening around them, and they accept as conservative bias whatever currently exists. So most people are going to be for slavery. Most people are going to be for whatever religion they're brought up with. Most people are going to accept anarcho-capitalism or freedom if that's what most people have around them. and there are logistical, technical reasons why that can come about even in spite of conservative bias. So, uh, if there was to say, if we were to achieve what the technological anarchists want, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, I'm just saying it's possible, where people could handle their finances, handle their economy, take care of themselves through the market, and use technological means to avoid regulation and taxation of the state, or the state collapses for some other practical reason. Right? We have state collapse happens even when people believe in states. In that situation, it's not easy, but it's not hard to imagine just a new order arising, and people will adapt their expectations to that. I think that you are not wrong. I think that most people's intuitions today is not for a total free market. They have mixed emotions, right? Most people do believe in some freedom, some autonomy. They do believe that people have rights, although they don't define this necessarily very well. They just also have other intuitions that, surprisingly enough, line up to what they're taught in public schools. Saudi produces at about $10 a barrel, I believe. That sounds about right. I know in 91 they were looking to sell at $19 a barrel, and they probably can produce it cheaper now than they could back then. Hey Dave, I just invested in a natural gas and oil company 18 months ago. They were trading at $15 a share, and today I picked it up for $1 a share. What's your prediction on oil with coronavirus? So I'm not going to make predictions, people. The oil industry has just been cyclical forever. It's been cyclical as long as I've been in it. Whenever I've talked to older people, it's been going on forever. It goes up and down and up and down. I do not know to what degree this is because of quote unquote free market activity, and what degree this is because of the boom and bust cycle. I'm really not sure. What tends to happen is when the price of oil is high, you get a lot of new drilling that goes on, new exploration. Uh, Companies that have existing wells, I mean, if you have a well that's already drilled that's producing, you can very easily just turn it off. You can just shut the spigot. It's like if you have every time you drill a well, it's like you create a water well and then you turn on the sink and you have water. Well, if the price of water gets really uh, low, you can just turn the sink off. So what happens is you get more and more wells, and so I believe, I don't know if this is true now, but in maybe 5, 10 years ago, there was something like 1,000 oil rigs in the United States that were actively drilling, and 1,000 oil rigs they're going to drill. This day and age, probably on average, each rig is going to drill about one well a month. So you do the math, that's 12,000 new wells a year. That's a lot. So however many oil wells there already are in this country, and the number is probably in the millions. Now, of course, the older ones aren't going to produce that much, if any, but you're adding a couple thousand new wells every year. Let's just say that. And so what tends to happen is then the supply starts to increase. At some point, they're able to increase supply faster than demand goes up. This was the problem with the peak oil predictions, is they basically said that supply cannot keep up with demand, and that turned out not to be true. Demand has been increasing, but it doesn't increase at the same rate all the time, and supply can increase pretty radically. So then what happens? We have all these new wells producing, which brings supply up. Then there's a slag in demand, and the price starts to go down, and the next thing you know, it doesn't make sense to drill oil wells anymore. And so fewer oil wells are produced, and the whole system repeats again. It's quite annoying. So I've had periods in my career where I worked all the time, every day. If you go back to 2012, 2011, 2013, my first videos, most of those videos are recorded on oil rigs because I spent all my time on oil rigs. The last 3 or 4 years, it has not been like that at all. Since 2015, it's been a lot slower. I'm still getting steady work, but not nearly what it was but in the past. And it's just crazy. It's in the upslope. It's just crazy easy money. Everyone's making bank. Everyone's making six figures. You're not even trying. You're barely working. You're hiring all your buddies, and then on the downslope, nobody works for like a year. So in terms of, I don't know, the coronavirus is going to be bad, but it's not going to end the world. So if you're thinking about investing, I don't think you should think about how to invest for the coronavirus right now. You already missed the boat. If you've been buying masks and stuff, 3 months ago, you would have been smart, or prescient. But yeah, just be thinking ahead. I'm not trying to attack you, despite my far-right, rather authoritarian political leanings. I find your ideas to be unarguable. Just don't think it's realistic and haven't heard you comment on that. Don't think it's realistic in what sense? Like, I'm not delusional. I know that most people are not anarcho-capitalists. Most people don't really have well thought out ideas at all, though. They just go off their intuitions and they accept whatever they're either taught in school or what they think the majority of people around them believe. And while it's frustrating, the fact is that people's ideologies can change and people's ideologies has changed. So kind of the premise of your argument here would be that it can never change, or if it can change, it can't possibly change in a libertarian direction. And I think that that's wrong. There's no evidence that it can't change in a libertarian direction. How that happens, is there a way to make that happen? That I'm not sure. If I knew how to do that, I would do that. I don't know that there is a way to guarantee that outcome. I think it's a little too difficult than that. Um, but people can change their mind, society can change its mind. This idea that it's determined completely is just kind of silly. That's not to say, I'm going to get a lot of people here saying that I'm a genetic denialist. I'm not. It's just, the ideology of the United States has changed a lot over the years. We've seen this on numerous issues. We've seen this with something like gay marriage, right? Everyone was against gay marriage up until 15 years ago, and then suddenly everyone was for it, or nearly so, right? Things can change that quickly. Same things happen with drugs. It could happen with other things. But I'm not denying that, like a lot of people, they have very mixed intuitions. Like a lot of people think you do have rights and that you should be able to do what you want with your body and that you should be able to keep your own money. And then they also believe, that they should help the poor and that that means giving the government half their income, right? And I think that's something that a lot of people can be dissuaded from. But, I haven't done it yet, so you could be right. I think the coronavirus is being used to crash the system. I could be wrong, but it wouldn't surprise me. I don't think that the coronavirus is man-made, and I don't think it's being perpetuated by men. But I do think it's going to happen is the Cassandra Austrians, the Peter Schiffs and Bob Murphys of the world. Uh, they're always eventually right. There's one thing to say we're going to crash all the time, and eventually you won't. You will be correct. But I do think that we're due for another business cycle collapse, and this would really, really hurt Trump in his reelection campaign. And I think that coronavirus might be tipping it off at this point because it's interrupting the supply trains and freaking people out. Supply chains, not the supply trains. And although probably some of the trains as well. I think this will be a really good pivot for Trump to say the economy is not crashing because of anything I did, uh, but it's because of coronavirus. And it's kind of interesting here. Trump is an interesting case because when Obama was president, Trump was very explicit in that it was a phony recovery, and it was just he actually has some pretty um, erudite Austrian perspectives when he was tweeting about Obama, and I think correctly in that case. But then when he became president, he just owned it and said, "Oh, all the facts and figures are good. Everything that sounds good is great," and he basically took ownership of the economy. And I think that what he had said against Obama was true, and it was true for what's been happening with him to a large extent. He has actually done some positive things for the economy, like the amount of deregulation that he's been able to bring. Paltry compared to what should happen, but it's at least kind of a step in the right direction. So I think there's legitimate economic advances that have happened, but a lot of it has just been the cheap credit of the Fed. And he's been explicit about demanding that that happen. He's been encouraging that. And so a bust was going to happen. The bust is happening now. And I think that he'll be able to blanket off because everyone knows he didn't cause coronavirus. In fact, he's going to be able to blame that on China, which just fits right in with his rhetoric in the past anyway. So as long as he doesn't die of it himself, I think this is really a boon for him. Because everyone's going to be able to say, well, coronavirus is the reason the economy collapsed, not the Fed. Yeah, but Biden will punch you for your indolence. It's because I'm full of bullshit. Once the oil is gone, I don't think these oil kingdoms will make it, whereas maybe in a country like the US would fare better. In the United States, I mean, look, the lower the cost of energy, the better it is for the United States. Uh, it's not good for countries and economies that have based everything on the extraction of oil, though. So, which we don't. Uh, Good evening. Thank you, Thomas Jackson. Since we got more going on with us with technology and stuff. Yes, we have a lot more going on. We're a much more robust economy, and I say that with the knowledge of the boom and bust cycle of the Fed going on. But we have a lot of stuff that's going on in the United States. Not everyone works in industry, not in energy. Not everyone's dependent on an energy job. We have lots of farmers. We have lots of manufacturing still, despite what a lot of people say. What did I hear in what was it? Sam Harris interviewed a tech guy, and he said that from like 1993 until the year 2000, more wealth was created in a 7 mile radius in San Francisco than was created in Europe from the end of World War II until that same time. If that's even, I believe the guy wasn't using hyperbole. I think that was an actual stat. That's just incredible if you think about it. And the United States has been at the forefront of a lot of that stuff. So it's still a dynamic, innovative economy in a lot of ways, and it doesn't need the energy sector to hold it up, unlike say Russia or Saudi Arabia. Uh, bu- 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 Why would the elites use a virus to collapse their own system? Yeah, I don't think that they would have any interest in doing that. But hell yes, Texas farm represent. Oh wow, I'm way behind. Sorry guys. Communism killed more people than the czars ever could. Absolutely true. Solzhenitsyn talks about that. He compares the secret police under the czars to the NKVD and the GPU under the Soviet Union, and there's just no comparison at all. Uh, I've heard Arkansas is a relatively good place to live in terms of freedom and opportunity. Is there any place you recommend moving in the United States? I've never heard that about Arkansas, and the parts of Arkansas I've been to, I definitely want to move to. Arkansas is, if anything, famous for like neo Nazis, white supremacists, and Bill Clinton. So probably not Arkansas. Obviously, I'm a free stater, so New Hampshire is a good place. Wyoming's also a good place. I'm not saying that society can't change, but power seems to be centralizing while at the same time society is getting chaotic. Just saying the libertarian ideas are less palatable now. Well, I don't. The centralizing thing is interesting because the state wants to centralize, it's incentivized to centralize, and we've had a lot of history where that has indeed happened. We also have centripetal forces going to. We have technological reasons. We have an economy that shifts, right? So a government will base its taxation on a certain type of society and a certain type of economy, and then as the economy changes, and in fact, very often will change in response to the taxation that's happening to avoid it, you can end up in a situation where it's not adequately like control quote unquote controlling what's going on, and as a result, it can lose power relative to everything else that's happening. I think that the whole internet thing and the communications change is really has been a game changer, and I don't think that they can put that genie back in a bottle. And the problem here is like they can't control the narrative in a way that they could before, and so um, yes, they still have a lot of influence and people still listen to them, but there's counter narratives out there that have wider and wider sways, and so you have people who believe different things, and it's very, very important for states to have an ideological, um, not 100% control, but they need to have a. I mean, I did a video a long time ago called "Ideology: The Linchpin of the State." If they don't have an ideology, they have to use direct violence to rule, and that is very difficult in the long run. So they need some kind of ideology, and that it's hard for them to compete now because there is a market of ideas that they're kind of there was before, but not to the same extent that we have now. It's radically more. So, oh, Jim Jesus, thank you for the dollar. Trump did H1N1. There we go. To get even with China, probably. Saying that libertarian ideas are less palatable. I don't know. I mean, it depends on the issue that you're talking about. There are a lot of people who think that there was this libertarian movement in 2012, and that it's maybe dawned. I don't know. A lot of this is anecdotal because it's looking at people who are post-libertarian. But the thing is, the number of people who identified as libertarian greatly expanded, and then we had a little bit of a retrenchment. But that means we went back to say 2010, not that we went back to 1990. And many of those people, even when they became post-libertarians, still retain a lot of libertarian leanings. So a lot of these white nationalist people, they still are economically pretty free market. Trump is proposing taking payroll tax to zero for both employers and employees as a stimulus for downturn. Well, that would obviously be very good. Unless and until they cut spending, we still have to deal with inflation, which, as Ron Paul always said, and quite correctly, inflation is a tax. Now, who's getting taxed is a little bit different. Where the buck is falling changes. Um, and employees and employers are probably not the people, the employees especially are probably not the people who will reap the most benefit. They'll hurt the most from the inflation. Um, I think Corona is a net positive for Trump. Incumbent presidents seem to do well in crises. Bush, 9/11. Yeah, I think that's a fair reading. And also, I think it's giving him a get out of jail free card for the economy. I think the economy was due for a collapse. I don't know if it was going to happen before he ran or not, or before the election. If we had a situation like happened in 2008, for those of you who don't remember, the economy crashed big time in September 2008 and October, and then we had a presidential election in November. And you know, I think Obama had a good chance of winning anyway because we'd had 4 years of Bush, but it just sapped all the momentum away from John McCain, even though he made a point of grandstanding that I suspended my campaign to come get it done to pass a fucking socialist TARP bill that pissed off half the Republicans. So uh, that last crisis definitely helped Obama. It definitely helped. It definitely hurt the incumbent president. Of course, the biggest case of this was Hoover. So FDR definitely had this huge mandate, not just in terms of the executive, but in terms of the legislature, and that turned out to be a huge disaster. One of the biggest non-war disaster in American history, I think, without question. Actually, worse than many wars that have happened in U.S. history. Um, Except for maybe the three big ones, it's probably the worst thing that's ever happened. Um, so no, I think the coronavirus is kind of giving Trump a get out of jail free card because he can say, I mean, very few people are going to have the sophistication to be like, well, the Fed's been pumping up, we're going to have a correction, and coronavirus is just kind of the trip line. No, most people are just going to be able to say, yep, it's China and it's coronavirus. So no, I agree with that. I think it probably isn't that positive for Trump. What do you think about Andrew Yang? Well, I appreciate his intellectual honesty and I think he's sincere. I also tend to think that he is dead wrong on his main issue. He's not dead wrong on other issues. Obviously, he's the most pro foreskin, anti circumcision presidential candidate we've ever had, although when he got pressed on that, he was extremely tepid on that issue, and I think that that was a missed opportunity. But I understand that it wasn't his, he has this one issue, this universal basic income that he really cares about. And unfortunately, even though that's his one issue, I think he's completely wrong about it. I tipped, thanks, Jim Jesus. I tipped earlier today too, if you know what I mean. But I asked earlier, but is there any way I could talk to you? You said you don't use Discord, but you're smart. I'd like to conduct dialogue if possible. Well, Jolly Crocodile, I've been answering all your questions here and talking quite a bit, so you know, that seems pretty good to me. Um, uh, if they thought it would only affect Asians, they might have let the Chinese steal it, hoping it would break out. Also, there was a breakout in the Canadian government lab. Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me if the Chinese blame this on the Americans. That seems to be something that they would likely do. Um, but look, we've had all these flus that have been coming out of China since forever. It is the place where they're most likely to come out of, so that's my first take. Uh, do you want me shot? No, not just yet. Uh, do you still see Yankee values in New England? What is the definition of a Yankee value? Thanks, Jolly Crocodile. Crocodile. Let's see. Have I let me plug my podcast if I haven't already. Crocodile. So my podcast is free, so you all can listen to it whenever you want for free. And I do put different content on there than I put here. So let me put a link to that in the description. It's not there right now. But the whole point of that is just I'm really worried of just getting canceled by YouTube at some point. Now, I'm pretty small, so I don't think I'm going to draw any direct attention, but you never know. These algorithms get better and better. So I've just been trying to diversify. And so let me put a link to my podcast on there. So like I said, I do put different stuff on there than I put on here. Probably I'm still looking for ideas on what people want to hear there. The one thing I don't like about the podcast is no feedback. So I don't know, I know people listen, I get the view counts, but I don't know what they think. And that would be helpful. It's not going to change my opinion, but it might change what I put out. So if you do listen and you do want to say something, just say it in a comment on a YouTube video. I will see that. So see, that should be updated now. Good. I don't know when it will update, but yeah, it turns out if you kill all sorts of animals in unsanitary conditions, you might pick up a virus or two. Yeah. So the more species of animals and the less sanitary and the more people, just the more likely it is. These viruses jumping from animals to humans is just on a one-to-one case is very unlikely. It's very rare, but you up your odds by having it. And there's a lot of evidence that when humans first domesticated animals at the start of the Neolithic, we basically started getting a series of pandemic after pandemic after pandemic, and it's actually very possible that what we saw with the Native Americans when the Europeans landed might have happened repeatedly in the Old World, all the way up through basically almost to the classical period and even after that. You would just have people living in really close proximity to, say, pigs, horses, dogs, chickens, goats, sheep, and you would get viruses that would cross. And obviously, they didn't have any medicine, they didn't have antibiotics, they didn't have any way to create vaccines or anything like that. And so you'd all these people living close together, and it was really bad. And we don't have the best records. A lot of this is prehistoric, literally. So and their remains are rarely found, and even if we do find them, we can't always tell if they had a disease or whatnot. I was actually just watching a video on the Yan Mayans, the Proto-Indo-Europeans, the people who probably first domesticated horses. That was the main topic, but they're saying there's some evidence that one of the reasons they may have spread so far is that um, plagues of diseases that they had developed themselves kind of spread out and decimated all the people around them. So it's not that bad anymore. We're not talking about, for perspective, kind of the worst case scenarios with this coronavirus. And I think that this is the worst case scenario, something like a 2 or 3% mortality rate, which is devastating, right? That's awful considering that, half the people are going to catch it within the next year. But if you think about that compared to 80%, 90%, 50% from pestilences in the past, that's really quite tame in comparison. But yeah, let's see. If you're just answering questions now, can you talk about fascist economic systems? Well, can you more specific? Is that a question? So the fascists are very. There's different types of fascists, right? You have the Italian fascists, you have the German fascists, you have the American fascists. But basically, the idea is um, you have a large interventionist state. You have private ownership of the means of production, so you still have companies that own the factories who drive profits from them. But what they do is largely directed by the state. So the state tells them, you must do this, you must do that. Um, the Germans had a word, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but it's like Gleichtung or alignment, where you kind of um, harmonize everything, right? So yes, Porsche is a company and Volkswagen is a company, and they're private companies and they make money, and it's fine that their owners are wealthy and that they pay their workers and whatnot, but they should be doing what is quote unquote in the best interest of the state or for the common good, as determined by the leader of the party, Adolf Hitler, or the government itself. And that's again, it's very common for common good arguments to be out there. Though, of course, their great Achilles heel is who decides what the common good is, because whoever that is the de facto ruler. But that's the idea. So you're not saying the state owns everything like you would in a Soviet system, uh, but the state does control not necessarily everything, but whatever the state thinks that it needs to control. So maybe they won't control shoe production, but they'll control everything else. They won't own it, but they will direct what's done. And that's the system that the Nazis had. That's the system that the Italians had. And we have a modified version of that here. And I know Mises Institute many years ago did a series on the economics of fascism, and on the cover photo of the lecture, they had a picture of Stalin, uh, of Hitler, Mussolini, and of Roosevelt. And especially during the New Deal, it was kind of overtly fashioned after what was done in Italy. Roosevelt even said so. So we still have a fascist economics. If that's if we're going to talk about a classical definition of the term, that's what we have. But Indo-Europeans are the most powerful group in the world. Rise up, fellow Yan Mayans. Yeah, that's what they said. Is the Yan Maya what we call the Yan Mayans? That's certainly not what they called themselves. That they might be the Proto-Indo-Europeans, and they might be the first people to domesticate horses or at least ride them. There's evidence. There's earlier evidence of people having a diet primarily of horse. They can't tell if they were domesticated or not. There's hot debates about bridle wear on the teeth, but yeah. But the Indo-Europeans, that's a linguistic family group, but it's not a coherent group in the sense that they're all right. So even the race realists out there, are you going to really say that you identify with the Iranians, right, who they speak in Indo-European, they speak Farsi? Do you identify with the people in northern India? Probably not. Do you identify with the Irish? Do you identify with everyone in South America who speaks Spanish, right? So if you're talking about an ethnic group, I don't think we know who the Yamnayans are ethnically today. They're probably somebody in the Ukraine, but we don't really know. Uh, what do you think of corporatism? Corporatism is another very common name for fascism, where you just kind of create a system that is beneficial for certain groups. It's not a free market. It's not free competition. It's not winners and losers and Adam Smith and all that. It's we pick what we think is valuable, and we have companies that cater to that or benefit from it. It's 2% assuming current unstressed medical support change. There will probably be medical support. Yeah, there'll be shortages. It will be bad. If you have to go to the hospital is probably going to be overwhelmed just for logistical reasons and because their own staff might be sick. So I don't think it's a question of whether or not you can avoid. I mean, you'd have to really go into isolation for months and months and months, and whenever you came back, you'd just be liable to catch it from the survivors. But the survivors being most people, obviously. But there is an argument to be had that you don't want to catch it and need to be hospitalized when everyone else is also sick. If you had to be hospitalized now, you'd probably be fine. If you had to be hospitalized in 4 months after it's over, or mostly over, it wouldn't be such a big deal. So there's an argument there. Uh, but are you an Ayn Rand fan by any chance? Well, If by fan you mean a practicing objectivist who believes in everything she said, no. If you mean fan by somebody who respects some of her writing and some of her ideas and her personhood, then yes, I'd say that I would. Why do you ask? Uh, Fantastic how the most draconian of legislation or policies can be enacted in the name of the common good or for the national security. Yes, because as Hayek said, the common good is not a sufficiently definite phrase to have any definite meaning. It doesn't mean anything. It can mean anything. Uh, I consider Indo-Europeans to be a religious and linguistic group, like Jews, I guess. Well, it definitely is a linguistic group, but what's the religion of the Indo-Europeans? Right? Indo-Europeans appear to be mostly Christian, but obviously the ones in Iran are not Christian, and the ones in India are not Christian. So I'd have to say I don't think that it's a. You could say maybe the Yan Mayans had a religion, but nobody follows that religion today. If they did, it would have been some kind of animism, most likely, and hardly anyone does that. The only people who do that today are like Africans and South Americans. Uh, Corona is fairly serious, has a high death rate, and can be transmitted through the air. It's reasonable to be safe, not sorry in the circumstances. Yeah, it sounds like it could be 10 times worse than the worst flu season. So that's quite serious. But that's also not a plague that's going to kill everyone. That is serious. Most people are going to get it. Most people who get it are not going to need to be hospitalized. And most of the people who get hospitalized are not going to die, but some people are going to die. And it could be hundreds of thousands in the United States. The estimate I heard today, which people should watch, but Joe Rogan interviewed an expert on diseases today. That this wasn't him coming up with the number; he was quoting it, but it's something like 480,000 people could die in the United States over the next year. That's very serious. Um, Yankee values: education, local political control, pursuit of the greater good of community, government is good and an extension of citizenry, social engineering, intellectual achievement, etc. Well, so that's quite a few different things, and you do definitely find some of them in New England. So in New Hampshire, local control is pretty common. The city seems to be the locus of most political activity and has the most power. The counties are practically non-existent, and the state is quite minimal in comparison to the cities. Um, the greater good, that's true everywhere. It's mostly true, though. It's more obvious in, say, Vermont or Massachusetts than it is in, say, New Hampshire or Maine. Um, Government is good and an extension of the citizenry. Uh, well, I mean, the motto of New Hampshire is "Give me liberty or give me death." Or no, wait. Did I get that wrong? Give me liberty, live free or die. Excuse me. Live free or die. So that varies, and there are quite obvious cultural differences between, say, Massachusetts and New Hampshire. It's quite. I mean, you cross the border and you can tell there's a different society. But I would say that everything that you list there is alive and well, at least in parts of New England. I doubt it. 12 people think died of it. Okay, Mark, I think what you're failing to understand here is it's just started. Like it literally has only been here for a few weeks. This is the early stages. Say for me, talking about Ayn Rand, she made a few errors in logic, but it seems like the overall argument was definitely in the right trajectory. I agree with that. I mean, she hated the term libertarian. She didn't say she was a libertarian. She didn't like to be identified as such, and she personally hated a number of famous libertarians, especially Murray Rothbard. But they did agree on an awful lot, whether she wants to admit it or not. I love the videos on group showers, etc. Why is that, Greg? Please. I love it when people love those videos, but I'm always curious as to why. So those videos are actually quite popular. They get thousands of views. It's those and the foreskin videos, man. People keep coming back for that stuff. Nobody like the libertarian stuff. Nobody goes back and rewatches that stuff. Those libertarian videos, people watch them. The most popular ones might have 1,000 views or 2,000 views. Um, or maybe if they have Stefan Molyneux in them, they might go up to 6, 7,000, and they still get viewers. But all my other libertarian stuff, man, nobody watches that stuff. It's not watched. It goes on the channel, and I get the initials, people who watch it, and that's pretty much it. And most of them are never watched again. And then the circumcision videos, the foreskin videos, and the shower videos, people just keep going back and back, and I get comments on those every day. I get messages about them, not every day, but regularly, and they get views every day. It's really interesting. Biden comes out against the AR-14. Yeah, he said some Detroit auto worker was full of shit. Biden's been all over the place on guns. He's all over the place on everything. Indo-Europeans had a cognate religion in the past with cognate deities and broadly similar belief systems. Most pagan religions are dead. I'm not sure if any random European even is one. Yeah, if there's any pagans today, they're neo-pagans, and they can't draw a lineage to before the modern era, not even close to the modern era. So I'm sure the Indo-Europeans had a religion. You might be right about that, and I would be interesting to say, hey, let's do a comparative analysis of all Indo-European religions and see. And you would obviously have to exclude Christianity from that because Christianity is a very heavily Semitic religion. But so you could kind of do a reduction the same way that we did for the language. So the way we were able to write and speak Proto-Indo-European is by comparing all the daughter languages today and reverse engineering them. You might be able to do that with religion, but if you did, I think you'd find that nobody follows that today. I mean, if every Jew converted to Buddhism, are they truly Jewish in the same sense as the ancient Israelites were? Probably not. Well, I don't think any Jews today, whether they convert or not, are Jews in the same sense of the ancient Israelites, because I mean they're different in so many other ways. Um, this gets into the debate of whether Jews is a race or a religion. The religion itself seems to indicate that it's strongly racial, right? There's a strong emphasis on marrying another Jew. The halakhic law that I think most Jews subscribe to is that it's passed from the mother to the siblings to the children. So if your mother's Jewish, you're Jewish. If your mother's not Jewish, you're not Jewish. Conversion is there. This is debated because there is evidence that in the past there have been certain times when Judaism was more evangelical, but it's not the case now, and it doesn't seem like it's usually been the case. And it's the case now that yes, you can convert to Judaism, but they have a lower status as far as most other Jews are concerned, right? That they're not real Jews, and there's even debates about how many generations can you be Jewish for you to be really Jewish. Um, no, they have a very strong in-group mentality. You might be interested in Jolly Crocodile too if you haven't read The Culture of Critique. He talks about that a little bit when he talks about Michel Foucault. I found this really astounding. So Foucault, the postmodernist AIDS spreader, who you hear a lot about through Jordan Peterson talks about him a lot, and so does Thaddeus Russell. Um, Foucault's family, he was French, but his family were from Algeria before that. They lived in French Algeria. They left French Algeria the after the revolution. But before that, for something like 400 years, they had lived in Spain. And they were I'm going to misremember this term, but in 1492, Queen Isabella expelled the Jews from Spain. And she said all Jews must leave Spain or convert. And of course, many Jews did leave Spain and they moved to places in the Arab world, especially like the Ottoman Empire. But many Jews remained in Spain, but they had to quote unquote convert. And I think the term is converso. Could have this wrong. And the problem was many of them didn't really convert, or at least the Spanish were very suspicious that they didn't really convert, that they continued to be Jews. And the whole point of the Inquisition was to find out who was really Jewish uh, and who wasn't. So apparently Foucault's family is a converso family, and they, for 400 years, continued to live, 350 years, continued to live in Spain and to identify publicly as Catholic, but privately remain Jewish. And to the point where they were getting circumcised and retaining the language and everything. If that's true, that's astounding that you could go 400 years and secretly remain Jewish. Now, one wonders if the fires of the Inquisition burned that brightly for so long. Maybe that only lasted for half a generation and then they kind of loosened up a little bit. But if that's true, that's a remarkable indication of the cohesion of the identity in spite of explicit persecution for a very long time. But this is, cultural critique talks about this, where there's a strong emphasis on in-group solidarity, remaining in the group, marrying within the group, raising your children to be part of the group, and yeah. So Biden versus Trump will be hilarious. I agree, it will be hilarious. As long as we're not all dead from coronavirus, it should be really funny. I like your group shower and foreskin videos because you're the only guys that talk about them about mental male health issues. My negative body image has been one of the biggest problems in my life. Well, Jolly, I highly recommend you join a gym, go on a diet, and start taking communal showers with other men. I do actually think that's good for people. The group shower videos resonate with a lot of gay men, I think. I grew up thinking about group showers were like my dirty secret little. Yeah, you may be right, Richard, but actually a lot of straight men also like them. There's a lot of straight men who value that experience. Do they value it the same way that a gay man does? No, probably not. There's obviously some differences there. But there are a lot of straight men who, I mean, I got peer pressured into it by straight men. My friends who are totally straight, father, they now have families and children, and I never had any indication that they were gay, never heard any rumors. So every basis for assuming they're straight, they were peer pressuring me to join them. It wasn't the other way around. So it may be true that gay men are more willing to talk about it or be overt about it because a straight guy who starts talking about how much he loves to communal shower runs the risk of being considered gay, and um, so they're not willing to do that if they're not gay. But a gay guy doesn't have to worry about that as much. I see the coronavirus fear mongering everywhere. Now it's even here. Viruses are way worse when it's cold. It's just starting. I'm unassuming it's on its way out. I think it is serious, but I think most people will be all right. The vast majority of people will be all right. More videos about your communal shower experiences would be great. Okay, but there's not a lot of experiences to be had. I mean, to be honest, I do it every day, but it's pretty mundane. I didn't do it today, actually, but um, those experiences are overwhelmingly mundane. Um, I have encouraged other people to do it. I took a friend of mine for the first time. He tried it, he liked it, and he's going to get one of his buddies to start doing it. So it's something that I actively try and cultivate among others, try to get others to talk about. Also, any of you who are interested, please go to the communal shower subreddit. Just Google search communal shower subreddit, and I've got a subreddit there, and there's a community there. And they're not all gay, man. There's a lot of straight people there. There's even some women there. One of the most active people in that subreddit is a woman who greatly values communal showers, and she came there. Nice to see you online. Thank you, Uncommon Knowledge. You're not the Uncommon Knowledge from the University of Stanford that interviews, Thomas Sowell all the time, are you? Uh, I'm not gay, but I remember first becoming aware of my circumcision at the same time I started developing sexual attraction towards women. I was confused about the large circumcision scar for years. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, consider restoration. That's one of the few things you can do about that. Uh, there's a lot of J obsessed people these days online. Is J for Jew? Are we not allowed to type Jew in the comments? Um, just got in, not sure what I missed. Talked about the oil industry mostly. I haven't really done a little bit coronavirus, but not a ton. I'm at the gym right now. I haven't been fat in years. Sorry, I won't group shower because I think I'm a flamboyant. Because I'm sorry, I won't group shower because I'm not a flamboyant homosexual. Okay, not everyone who group showers is a flamboyant homosexual. In fact, I cannot recall ever seeing a flamboyant homosexual in the group showers. So if you have body image issues, you should definitely consider doing that, especially if you have a workout buddy. Uh, Pertho fasting, I'm assuming that means periodic fasting is really good for losing weight. I agree. Don't eat meat or dairy. Only animals allowed are invertebrates like shrimp. Uh, well, you said it, not me. Romans had communal baths. Yeah, actually, communal nudity is common in a lot of things. Turkish baths, Greek baths, sweat lodges. They have them in the Saito in Japan. They have them all over. It's very common. Logistically, it was kind of the only way you could get a bath in pre-modern times, so it's not that uncommon. Uh, Never been in a communal shower. Don't know where to find them. YMCA's are good places to check. Also, swimming pools. And I'm guessing they are more likely to prefer same-sex partners. I went to a Russian Jewish sauna, a Jewish sauna, oh, and a Korean spa. It was great. I've been to a Korean spa and it was great. I had a lot of fun. Korean spas are very explicitly non-sexual. They're heavily policed, at least the one I went to. So they're just nude, but it's platonic. Um, is there a circumcision museum? That would be disgusting. As far as I know, there's not. Apparently, he thinks every Marine is a flamboyant homosexual. There we go. There we go. The truth comes out. Well, many Marines are actually flamboyant homosexuals, and I will say, even though the Marines are the smallest branch, then I've met far more Marines than any other branch, so they probably are the gayest military unit. Uh, bu- 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 Coast Guard, those are the real men. Second week of Lent, and I've lost 10 pounds so far. You're Catholic and you're watching this homosexual anarchist uh, communal shower flamboyant fag during Lent. I think that kind of cancels out your diet. I'm guessing nudists are more likely to prefer same-sex partners. You may be right, but there are indeed many, many nudists who are not gay. And in fact, because there is a stigma attached with nudity that assumes perversion or sexual promiscuity, many nudists are actually quite explicitly anti-sexual. Like they will talk. When I was trying to promote the communal shower subreddit, I messaged the people who handled one of the nudism subreddits, and they were receptive. But many people in that group kind of attacked me and said, "Look, you're gay. You're clearly into this for sexual reasons, and we don't want to have anything to do with that. Nudism isn't about sexuality, blah blah blah." And so this is something that a lot of, and I've heard this before. So a lot of nudists are quite. I don't know if they're compensating, if they're just trying to say, "Hey, look how non-sexual we are," because they actually are sexual, or if indeed maybe they are fully platonic. My guess is it's a little bit of both. Mm, what do you think of men going their own way and men's rights activists? So I think men's rights activists is understandable because I do think when it comes to family law, especially when we come to custody battles and divorce, the state very much favors women in a discriminatory way that's highly corrosive to families and to men. Um, that being said, and men have a right to go their own way and do whatever they want. That's fine, and I understand the incentives behind not wanting to be tied down in a marriage with a woman who would have all these legal powers over you. However, I think if you're a heterosexual man, uh, you are in the long run not doing yourself any favors if you think you're just going to retire from a lasting relationship with a woman. Now, I know that's not necessarily what all men going their own way say or do. They're not saying they're going to be celibate. Obviously, you say you're going to be celibate, that's not going to work. But if you want to raise a family, if you want kids, I think the best way to do that is through marriage. And so you're going to have to work a way around it. But you should just do your best to be the kind of man who can control his woman the right way, right? So I don't know a more polite way to say that, but I don't mean that in terms of physical power, although that's always the case with men. They always have that option, but that's not the way you want to play it because the police that she calls over are going to have more physical power than you are. But just the idea that you can, I don't know how to say this, seduce, impress, um, enthrall a woman enough that she will be into you and she will want to be with you and she will want to defer to your opinions and whatever. Uh, I think that's true that many women will adopt the ideologies of their husbands, and if you do a good job, you have not too much to fear. You should be all right, and you're not going to be happy otherwise, probably. Up, 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 up. Do you have a boyfriend? No, I am. I've gone on 2 or 3 dates with somebody recently, and that's going well, but it's very early stages to call it a boyfriend at this point. Um, Richard Wilson. Orthodox fasting. I'm an Orthodox Christian. Like Eastern Orthodox, uh, what type of fasting do you recommend again? Well, if you're asking me, I think I do one meal a day. I feel like that's the best, and I really don't care too much what that one meal is. Um, my go-to is probably going to be chicken or turkey, but maybe red meats, and then baked potatoes or rice. But I think any kind of clean carb is fine, and any kind of meat is fine. Don't worry about fat. Fat's fine too. But I really do like the one meal a day, and I will also skip a day every once in a while. There was a time this summer where I did one meal every 48 hours pretty consistently, and I lost weight pretty regularly, and I felt pretty healthy. I can find, even with 48-hour fasts, I can be very active, and I mean very active, and still feel good. So I think that people underestimate or they overestimate the frequency that they need meals. You don't need meals that much under most circumstances. When you read history and you read about people, what people had to go through and how people had to live, and if you just think evolutionarily speaking, hunter gatherers are not going to have a big meal every day necessarily. You might have periods where that's true, and you're going to have other periods where you're going to have a lot of famine. And if we couldn't cope with that, we wouldn't be here. So I think it's maybe it's a mental thing, but if you can go a day, you can go 2 days, and it's really not that bad. It's really not that bad at all. You can even feel good. You can even feel better. You can feel more alert and more. It's crazy, but I felt more alert and more energetic when I'm fasted than when I'm full. Uh, no meat, no dairy. Only animals would be invertebrates like crabs and shrimp. Did Okay, blah blah blah. I understand it's not only about people assumes it's an entirely sexually based lifestyle choice. It's it's not obviously, but there is a stereotype. Yes, there's a stereotype, and it's not based on nothing, but there's plenty of people who just look. Nudity is something that you can enjoy non-sexually. Definitely is something you can enjoy non-sexually. Many people do, and I don't think that they should have the stigma attached that they are just out there to have sex constantly. I have communal showers every day, sometimes multiple times a day. I never have sex in them, and I never hook up with anybody there, and I never hit on anybody there, even though there are people there that I probably would like to hit on. It's just not the environment, and it's not the only reason that you can enjoy it. And my straight friends, they definitely weren't trying to hit on me. They just enjoyed doing it. Uh, how do I enthrall a woman? Do I tell them about my circumcision and communal shower experiences? Please respond. Well, you're asking the wrong person about enthralling a woman, but you want to be confident and you want to be self assured, and doing communal showering can help you with that. Being physically fit can help you with that. Being proud of yourself can help you with that. You want to be confident. Confident is a really important thing when it comes to attracting a mate, I think, male or female. Beyond that, I don't really know what they like. There's actually apparently the straight aesthetic is based on the gay aesthetic, so you want to try and look like a fit twink or a twunk. That would also work. Eastern Orthodox fasting. That's interesting. Are you like Greek or Russian or something? Have you ever heard anything about unisex communal showers? Do they exist anywhere? I've heard of them. I'm sure they do exist. I'm not sure where. Sometimes I hear Eastern Europe will do that, but I do think the tendency is to be gendered segregation. But I've been to nude beaches that were both sexes. So that wasn't a shower, but it was a nude beach, and there were men, women, and children. So I mean, you can find that in Vermont pretty much anywhere you go. Um, I think Liu Yu is really handsome. Who's Liu Yu? Uh, I did a 9-day fast a couple weeks ago. It was awesome. After day two, wasn't even hungry. Lost about 15 pounds. Yeah, you tend to stop. I don't know. It's hard to describe, but you're just not hungry when you eat a lot. It's actually if you eat every day, you're kind of constantly desiring the fuel. And once you switch over to using your fat stores, you're just burning fat and not hungry. Confidence is key. Taking care. Mark, I was not reading you, Mark. I said that myself. So, don't have to be a model, look good, work with the beauty you have, enhance. That's where it's at. Yep. Lutherans fast like you. I'm not a Lutheran, but I guess they're very wise. Totally agree. Uh, I'm straight. Wish I had more straight buddies who wanted to communal shower together. Well, you should try and cultivate that somehow. Get gym buddies, form a sports team, a hiking league, whatever it takes. Find a way, find a place, make it happen. Be a leader. Be the change you want to see in the world. To attract a woman, totally talk about your circumcision. They all want to hear about it all the time. You see, the problem here is that a woman who is strongly anti circumcision probably has a fetish for foreskin. And so if you talk about your foreskin all the time or your circumcision all the time, you're going to turn off the women who would even want to have that discussion. And yet the women who do like circumcision are not going to want to hear you bemoan it. They want to hear you glamorize it. So that's a catch 22. You probably don't want to talk about your circumcision with a woman until you have like enthralled her, and then you can explain why you are doing foreskin restoration, and she can get over that. Uh, bu- 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 I'm a German, but I'm going through a process to convert. It takes over a year to become a member. Wait, like you actually live in Germany, German, or you're an American German? Do you have any guns? Yes, I have many guns. Do you drink a lot of water daily? Not a lot, but some. I'm trying to move to New Hampshire. I would enjoy access to places to swim, sunbathe nude in central New York, where I am now. There are few rivers, waterfalls known for this, and it's quite enjoyable. So technically nudity, public nudity is illegal in New Hampshire. There are places where it's practiced. There are plenty of remote places. I know people who have hiked mountains naked. The other thing is that there are anywhere in Vermont's legal and Vermont's nearby. So when I want to go to a nude beach, I will go to Vermont, but then I don't have to pay any taxes there, so it's fine. Um, Guns are dangerous. I think we should use more common sense gun control. And I made a video on that, common sense gun control. Anyone can go watch it. Uh, Even in a group, you said there is more of that in Vermont. New Hampshire is more stuffy. Do I have to cross over to Vermont to find those places? No, there's places you can do it in New Hampshire, and I've been looking. Like, there's plenty of isolated places you can get away with anything, and it's also kind of a live and let live culture. So if you're on some isolated stream way up in the White Mountains, no one's going to call the cops or even find out that you're there. If you want to go to just a public beach in the middle of a city, though, you probably got to go to Vermont, which fortunately is not far. Um, Favorite gun, thinking of getting an AR-15 soon. I'm not a fan of the AR-15s. I don't like AR-15s. I've never enjoyed them. My favorite gun is probably an M1A, the AR AR-14 actually. M1A by Springfield Armory. FNFAL is a great gun, and HK91 is a great gun. I've got a Mauser that's a great gun. Um, AK-47 is a great gun, although probably not the best caliber. So no, I'm not an AR guy. I don't like that they're so popular. I hope they got communal showers in DC. Want to go there for Cherry Weekend in April and try it out. Closest I've ever gone to showering publicly was at the hotel with a guy, but separate showers and lockers. Well, there's bathhouses in DC, so I'm sure there's communal showers someplace. Don't know that I've ever been one in DC though. Okay, I'm not reading that comment, Savvy Symbiote. There's standards on this channel. Lengthyounarther seems like a lot of libertarians are into entrepreneurship. Have you ever thought of starting your own business? Do you think owning your own business gives you more freedom? Yeah, I think there is an argument that libertarians should just kind of become successful. And I have friends who are doing that, who are becoming successful and becoming wealthy and becoming property owners and landowners and real estate developers and whatnot. And there's actually quite a lot of that in New Hampshire that goes on. So, yes, having more, the more money you have, the more autonomy you have. If you own your own business, you have that much more autonomy than somebody who's just an employee. So, I do think that's a good idea. If I had an idea that would be a good business, I would do it, but I just don't. So, um, can you explain why you like nude beaches? I really can't understand. Well, it's just a nice way to relax. It feels good to be open. It feels good not to be ashamed. It's more comfortable to swim naked. So like a swimsuit is really unnecessary clothing. Clothing's great. We need clothing when it's cold. We need, shoes when there's ice and whatever. If clothing's good when it's really hot because you don't want to get sunburned or whatever. So there's definitely, I'm not a nudist all the time. I don't believe in just being naked constantly, but uh, if the weather is nice and you're in a nice location and you're not worried about too many mosquitoes or whatever, swimming naked is a lot more fun than swimming with a suit. And if you're with people, it's just a little bit more social. There's just another element of intimacy there. Uh, bu- 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 All right, I'm signing off. Thanks for the stream, man. All right, thanks, Jolly Crocodile. Appreciate the questions and have a good night. Jolly went to the nude beach. He couldn't wait. I don't blame him. I don't blame him. I started going to a nude beach last summer, and then I had to go to Montana, and I was so pissed. I really missed it. Have you seen an uptick in Trump's blue-collar business boom in New England? No idea. I know the unemployment rate in New Hampshire is like the lowest in the country, but it's kind of always been that way. So I don't know. I don't know if that can be attributed to Trump at all. I also appreciate it when you do this stream. Yeah, you appreciate it so much that you never donate anything. Thanks a lot. Just kidding. Do, 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 do. So I'm here, but I'm about an hour behind. Well, it was just a bunch of shooting the shit visitor. Uh, no, don't do that to catch up. Ask a question now. Bernie is done. Biden is up in Michigan by 13 points. So in 2016, Bernie stole Michigan from Hillary. That was a big shock. She kind of had it locked up, and Bernie won, and she was fucking apoplectic about it. If you read the book Shattered about her campaign, that was a huge disappointment for her, even though she still won the nomination pretty handily. So that's interesting that Biden is doing much better than Hillary was. It is, I guess we could say that one thing I will say, Hillary is one of the most despised personalities in American history and has been for decades. And whatever you want to say about Biden, Biden doesn't have that status. People maybe don't agree with him. People think he's crazy or whatever, and it seems like he is. But he is not seen as literally evil. There are many, many, many people who see Hillary Clinton as very evil. And not only that, not just right wingers, left wingers. And this is something I noticed in 2016, 2015, that all of my friends who were Bernie supporters, of which there are many, 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 And here's another interesting thing is I know very few people who are, championing Joe Biden, right? I don't have lots of people who love Biden. There's lots of Bernie supporters. Those people for a year were saying and tweeting and sharing that Hillary Clinton is a fascist. She's a capitalist. She's evil. She's a liar. She's a cheater. Well, you know what? I bet a lot of those people did not vote for Hillary Clinton. So they're not going to have the enthusiasm for Biden, but they're also not going to have the antipathy for Biden. So that I don't know if that balances out for him or not. Speaking of blue collar and Trump, I noticed a trend where wealthy trying to take an average Joe identity. Well, Mark Gage, that's actually a very long-term trend that's been going on for quite a while. The elite boarding schools in the country, St. Paul schools, Groton, some of the others. One of the main things that you learn there is how to interact with wealthy people and be wealthy and be erudite and cultured and sophisticated, but also how to slum it up with the plebs. And that's a big part of going to Harvard. And you go to Harvard and you meet, your roommates are billionaires and well, Obama's kids or whatever. But then you also go to Southie and get drunk with locals and cavort around. So in the in the non-official aristocracy, we don't have feudalism here. We don't have officially genetic aristocracy. So, and political power is through appeal to the masses. So what you do is you uh, grift and pretend to be of the masses. It's seen as a bonus. No one likes to brag about how rich they are unless they're Donald Trump. And of course, we see this recently with people like Carlos Maza, who is apparently his family is worth many millions of dollars, yet he's workers of the world unite, as if he's ever had a real job. Mm, I think that social nudity is a good thing between men, but it's not a lifestyle. After about 2 to 3 seconds, oh my gosh, wiener goes away, and you want to talk about something more substance. Yeah, you get over it very quick. This is one of the most common observations I've seen both with myself and with others, is that people have tremendous trepidation about nudity. They don't want to do it. They're scared. They will go to any length to avoid it. And then as soon as they do it, like once, literally within seconds, it's just like not a big deal. Uh, yeah, Hillary won Missouri by 0.25 and Biden is up by 25. That is really fascinating. Uh, that is really fascinating because they have the same opponent. That's really interesting. Biden, the guy who sniffs people. And that's going to be everywhere. Trump is going to retweet that. They're going to be talking about that. He's going to keep doing it, apparently. He hasn't stopped. So we're going to be treated to months of him sniffing people and talking about the majesty of his leg hairs and how much black children like to play with them. Do you see Hillary making a speech at the DNC convention this fall? That's a good question. Um, no, I don't see that. I don't think that would happen unless she was angling to get the nomination. Which, if there was a brokered convention, I think that there would be a really big risk of her doing that. But now it's looking like a brokered convention is very unlikely. Also interesting to see the Bernie supporters and the Biden supporters basically completely switch on their views on the brokered convention. So when it looked like Bernie was going to steamroll his way to victory, but not necessarily to a majority, well, he was saying, well, there shouldn't be a brokered convention. It should be the person with the most votes, even if they don't have a majority. Whereas the conservatives, the moderates, so called, were saying no. The rule is you have to have a majority, and so it should be. Which is also interesting, where they're like, the electoral college shouldn't matter, but then and democracy, 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 but then oh no, the vote doesn't matter. We want to have super delegates, whatever. But now that Bernie is now not likely to get the majority and not have the most votes, but there's still a chance that Biden doesn't have a majority. Now the Bernie supporters want a broker convention. They completely inverted on their principle on what should happen based on what would be best for them, which is typical. Completely typical. Uh, but no, I don't. If there was a broker convention, yes, I think that Hillary giving a speech and then, oh, let's by common acclaim, let us promote Hillary Clinton. I see that could have happened, but if Biden runs away with it, then no. But he might appoint her as vice president if he has a death wish. Um, Sleepy Biden is a better candidate than Hillary. Get wrecked, woman. Yeah. So a little inside tact here. When the primary was happening in New Hampshire, I was obviously hooking up with the staffs of all these people. So I hooked up with people on Warren's staff, people on Biden's staff, and people on Buttigieg's staff. And the guy on Buttigieg's staff is somebody that I've known for quite a few years, and I'm actually friends with. And he spent the night, and then the next morning he said, "Hey, I need to go to campaign headquarters. Can you give me a ride?" Which, of course, sure, I can give you another ride. And then I said, he said, "Can I get some coffee?" And I said, "Sure." And so we went to Dunkin' Donuts. And just as we were there, Joe Biden showed up. Now, there's the Biden bus, which says Biden on it, and that's the one he always comes out of, and that's the main bus, right? But that's followed by an unmarked, basically dark red, magenta colored bus, and that's the bus that he actually rides in. And apparently, it's just a giant bedroom where he sleeps all day. And the word on the street from my very politically connected and savvy hookup buddy, friend with benefits, is that he sleeps all the time. He's basically an old man, and that they keep him on that bus sleeping all the time. When they go to an event, both buses will show up. He will disembark from the Topaz bus, get onto the Biden bus, and then immediately re-exit. And the media will show that and pretend like this big fiction where they just pretend like that's the bus he was on. In this event, he was going to Dunkin' Donuts to announce that he was leaving New Hampshire early because he was getting trounced. And everybody kind of thought it was the end of his campaign. And there was about 2 or 3 days there when there was this awkward, he's a complete loser, and then he dominated South Carolina. Yeah, the plan to make Biden president of the United States, Hillary VP. We don't know that that's true, Mark. Kind of doubt it. They'd both be old. You want to get somebody who is going to get the progressives to vote, and that's not her. And you want to get somebody who they don't have health concerns with, and there's health concerns with her. There were health concerns with her in 2016. That's one of the reasons she lost. At my gym with all the people who are not politically savvy and not radical, right-wing people or libertarian people, they saw the videos of her collapsing at the 9/11 celebrations or memorials in New York, and they were just like, "Wow, she's a frail woman who's on her last legs." It's like FDR in his wheelchair and Biden with his naps. Yeah, it's that most Americans had no idea. In fact, basically no Americans had any idea that not only could FDR not walk, there was no point in his presidency where he could walk. He could stand on crutches, and he could wear these leg braces that would be rigid, and then people would surround, like his son or whoever else was kind of stand on either side of him and rock him back and forth for the newsreels. But he could not walk. He could not stand without being aided. And when he would campaign in person, he would ride around in a car. They would build all these elaborate platforms where they would just drive the car up, and there would be a microphone just placed at the edge of the door of the car so he could just talk into that. And the press corps in the United States, they totally knew, and they never reported it. They never reported it. And it just shows to the degree to which they are beholden to their political masters. Um, Now, you could argue that Biden needing naps and being old is not the same as FDR being a cripple, but there you are. Do you own an AR-14? I'm not going to answer that, but yes. Uh, the media won't cover it. Yeah, they won't cover that he's got. Look, this was not a secret. Everybody in the press corps knows. Everyone in the press corps knows. Everyone on the other campaigns knows. And they're not going to report it because the people on Biden's campaign know all this shit about Buttigieg or Warren or whatever. They all have their warts and their disreputable aspects, and they just don't talk about it to each other. It's this big Beltway club, and they all respect each other relative to everybody else, right? They want to be the perfect people. They're the good people, the sophisticated, the elites, and they don't want to reveal the warts to the plebs, so they don't. technically losing your mind and not being able to stay awake is worse than not being able to walk. Well, to be fair, at the end of his presidency, like FDR actually died, but there's a really good book, As We Go Marching by, or no, the Roosevelt, excuse me, the Roosevelt Myth by John T. Flynn, who was a contemporary, right? He was in the press corps in the 40s, in the 30s and 40s. He was one of those people who started off as a New Deal Democrat and then became huge critics of FDR. And the Roosevelt Myth was written right after the war, and really, really good book for anyone interested in it. I believe I made a video review of it way back in like 2013. But he talks about how FDR would, like, his doctor recommend, this is before his fourth election, so this is during his third term, was recommending that he work no more than 2 hours a day. He had to have frequent naps. He needed massages, and he was spending a ton of his time at this spa in Georgia. I forget what it was called, Piney Woods, something like that. And that's actually where he died. He didn't die in Washington. He died at this resort that he'd started going to when he first got polio. So, Flynn makes the point. Here we're involved in World War II, and the chief executive can't work more than 2 hours a day. He's on drugs. He's sleepy. He's incoherent. There's evidence too, like when he was going to negotiate with Joe Stalin and Winston Churchill, you don't want the president to be fucking on his deathbed, and he was. And it's very likely that his diplomacy suffered as a result, and we could literally be talking about whether or not China became communist in the end because of this. So, yes, you have a point, but FDR was really not fit to be president, especially with his last term. I think by his last term, before he got elected to his last term, he was literally dying, and I think he probably knew that. He just did not give a fuck. He wanted to be president for life, and that was completely irresponsible. I mean, the guy is clearly completely motivated by power and by glory in a way that I don't think any other president really was. Not Lincoln, not Wilson. Bad, horrible as those presidents were, I think FDR is the worst. But that's a great book, The Roosevelt Myth, for anyone who wants to read about it. A healthy FDR wasn't fit to be president. That's also true, but he was never healthy when he was president. He was a cripple the entire time, and he was a liar the entire time. He wasn't even fit. Look, he got introduced because of he's the second cousin of Teddy Roosevelt. He had a famous name, so he got appointed Undersecretary of the Treasury. That's it. Didn't you see Biden said, I'll take away your AR-14s, Fox News level material, but still. Yeah, I did see the clip. I couldn't hear what they were saying. Um, and I believe that was like a compilation video, so I don't know what he actually said. Biden said all kinds of weird, crazy shit. If you go, even years ago, the YouTuber, he's not really a YouTuber, but I don't know how to describe him, but I believe he's an objectivist by his name is Jan Helfred. And he used to do a thing where he would go and interview politicians, and he interviewed Nancy Pelosi and Bernie Sanders and a whole bunch of people. And he would sit them down, suit and tie, and ask them a series of questions. And most of the questions were pretty generic, like, what got you into office? What are your main priorities? But then so like with Nancy Pelosi, he answers all these, he butters her up with these regular questions. And then he's like, should employers pay employees a living wage, the minimum wage? And she's like, yes. He's like, so what about like internships? Should interns get paid, or should internships be for free? And she goes, no, interns should be paid. They should be paid a minimum wage. He goes, do you pay your interns? And she goes, well, that's different. Or so he'll catch them in contradictions. And he did this with Joe Biden. And he got Joe Biden to say that you should never be afraid and fear is pointless. And then Jan Helford was like, so if a tiger walked out here, we should just look at it and not worry about it. And Biden was like, yes, that's a good point. Anyway, those are good. If you find those interviews, those are good interviews. Um, Off to bed. Good night. Good night, Green Slug. Good luck finding straight guys to shower with you. If you ever find it, find my communal showering video and post so that we know if you were successful or not. more serious question, films like Das Boot suggest the German Navy was not very on board with Nazi ideology. Do you think this is true? So I wouldn't phrase it that way, but we do know that the amount of Nazi ideology in each branch of the Wehrmacht was different. So the branch of the Wehrmacht that was the most Nazi, that had the most Nazis in it, that was the most inculcated with Nazism, was the Air Force. Right? You have Hermann Goering's the head of the Luftwaffe. And a big part of that is because the Air Force really didn't exist until after the Nazis were there. There was no German Air Force after the Treaty of Versailles. So when the Nazis come to power and when Hitler comes to power in 1932, 1933, they create the Air Force from scratch, and they of course fill it with Nazis. So the Air Force, the Luftwaffe, was the most pro-Nazi. When you looked at the Army and the Navy, they already had large amounts of staff who were professionals who had been in the military before the Nazis came to power. The generals in the Wehrmacht, most of those people had served in World War One in the what's the name, the Reichswehr, in the World War One in the Kaiser's army, right? And their professionalism was needed, so the Nazis did not get rid. This is something that was different from, say, what Stalin did. The Soviets got rid of a lot of their Tsarist officers. Not all, they kept a couple, but they liquidated most of them, and so you had a lot of noobs who were communists and were not very good. The Germans didn't do that, and so the second rank would be the army. Army was mostly this Prussian officer class, which were German nationalists for sure, but not necessarily Nazis, and there weren't that many Nazis within the German army. There were, obviously, you had well, okay, I shouldn't say the Luftwaffe. The number one would be the Waffen SS. So the SS is completely 100% Nazi. Everyone in the SS had to be a Nazi. Not only were you a Nazi, you had to be a hardcore Nazi. Now, the SS is a secret police and a bodyguard unit for Hitler, but they did create military units called the Waffen SS, and that would be like army divisions. They had the best troops, they had the best material, they always got preferential treatment when it came to new weapons, and every single person in those units would be a Nazi, a card carrying, not just a Nazi, but like a hardcore Nazi. So Waffen SS would be the most Nazi, the Luftwaffe would be second, the army would be third, and the navy would be fourth. And a big part of that Hitler had a lot of antipathy towards the Prussian military class. He respected them in a certain way, but he also thought that their politics was wrong, their ideology was wrong, and they weren't necessarily the best National Socialists, even if they were good nationalists. He tended to really like the Navy. He had a lot of respect for Raeder uh, 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 and some of the other admirals, and seemed very much on board when the army had their idea of how to fight the next war. It didn't really match what Hitler had in mind, but the Navy's ideas did. So I think that is fair to say that among the four branches of the German military, that the Kriegsmarine would be the least Nazi of the three. But that does not mean that none of them were Nazis or that none of them agreed. They also had probably a more stoic view of the war, because the German army was very powerful relative to its and the people it was fighting. It was a very powerful army relative to France. It was a very powerful army relative to Poland. It was just a very powerful army relative to any of the people it's going to fight. And the same is true with the Luftwaffe. And the Luftwaffe had no equal. It's some near equals, but no equal. The German Navy was very, very far away from being as good as the Royal Navy or the French Navy or even the fucking Spanish Navy or the Soviet Navy, right? Or the Japanese Navy. So I think they had a much more realistic view of their odds. It was a much more sober look to be like, we are completely outclassed, and all we can do. I think one of the admirals had said, if we go to war before 1945, and they had a plan there, I think it was called Plan Z. The idea was they would start building up the Navy, and by 1945, they would have a Navy that would be as big as the British Navy, with aircraft carriers and blah, 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 blah. But if we go to war before 1940, all we can do is die bravely, and that is basically what happened. I mean, most of the German Navy was destroyed, most of the surface Navy anyway, was destroyed with the invasion of Norway in 1940, in the spring, like in April of 1940. So I think Das Boot's characterization of that is correct. There's another part of Das Boots that I really like, where they are listening to German propaganda that's claiming that, England's about to surrender, and they're on their last legs, and the captain says something to the effect of, if that's true, why does Churchill always have more ships? He always has more ships. He's always got more resources. The British were ready to hold out. The British were ready for that war, basically. And Yeah. So I think I'd say that's fair. I'd say that's accurate. Uh, Off to bed. Good night, Green Slug. You're probably already asleep. Um, was it FDR that the party brought up higher into politics because they thought he would die, or was that TR? This I don't know, Jared. I'm not sure. I know that there was TR getting because TR was given the vice presidency first. He wasn't the president; he was the vice president, and it was kind of seen as he's a radical, he's a loose cannon, he's a crazy person, but he's popular, and so but it's fine because he's just the vice president, and the vice president doesn't do anything. And then McKinley got assassinated, and I think there had been even a quote to the effect of, "Oh my God, what like." Can you believe that man is one breath away from being president? And that was TR. I don't think that's the case with FDR, but I'm not sure. And I'll be honest, I don't know a ton about the internal politics that went into FDR becoming first nomination. There was stuff there with the governor of New York, Al Smith. He had been the governor of New York in the 20s, but it's my understanding that basically because he had a Roosevelt name, he got appointed to the Undersecretary of the Navy, uh, and he was always really interested in the Navy. Um, Actually, I was just listening. Thaddeus Russell from Renegade History. I want to see this. He's writing a book on it apparently, but apparently FDR wanted to go to Japan since wanted to go to war with Japan since the time he was 14. That he has diary entries from the time he's an early teen saying he wants to go to war with Japan, and that like his first or second meeting of his staff when he became president in 1933, right? So, uh, what 8 years before Pearl Harbor, he says he wants to go to war with Japan, and apparently it was so ridiculous that half the people said they wanted to resign because this guy is just coming to power and saying I want to go to war with Japan. So he clearly hated Japan. So let's see. Hey Luke, how's it going? How is your wife doing? Are you still expecting? Last I heard, you said you were going to have a child. I don't know what the time frame was there. Um, I hardly hear about the former German aristocracy under the Nazis. I know Coco Channel hooked up with one during the Vichy regime in France. Yeah, I don't know too much about them. I mean, they're still there. Herr Hiller was pretty insane. Was he though? I mean, he was obviously a gambler, but to go from where he was to where he ended up, you almost had to be a gambler. All right, guys, we're going on an hour 45 minutes. Any last questions? I go over here, see what's being said. Du, 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 du. Have you heard about the Amazon Prime series Hunters? No. Are you a prepper? I was more into prepping when I was in college, and I do have a lot of stuff, but I'm not like an active prepper now. But I mean, prepping makes sense to me though. It just seems like you're prepared, and it's good to be prepared. It was rumored Winston Churchill had to bail her out. Bail who out? I don't know who Coco Chanel is, so I can't say. Never heard of that person. I'm not into fashion, as you probably well know. Oh, do we know yet? Has Biden won all these states tonight? Late straggler will watch in the morning. Good night, Ron. Have a good night. Coco Chanel is a big fashion icon in France. Oh, wow. And she was bailed out by Winston Churchill and was hooking up with German aristocracy. Hunters is torture propaganda. Again, I haven't seen it. I don't know anything about it. Sounds like it's 24 though, if it's torture propaganda. Did you get to hear Molyneux sing the national anthem when Trump won back in 2016? He actually has a pretty good voice. Well, he is actually an actor. That's what he's, trained to be. Um, did he sing it like ironically, or is like he was deeply touched? That's just so weird. He should have a good voice, though. I mean, he's a stage actor, so he would have had to learn how to sing. Is is Hunters any good? Should I watch it or should I not watch it? I try not to watch too much stuff. Which country has the best national anthem? Well, Deutschland, Deutschland über alles was written by Haydn, so probably that. Do you think it's right for the Austrians to declare victory if we have a crash because of coronavirus? Sure, because I don't think coronavirus will is going to do all the things that are going to happen in the crash. However, the Austrians kind of claimed victory after 2008, and that definitely was important, right? I know a lot of people who were just kind of run of the mill, middle of the road people who the crash happened and they realized it was a big deal, and so they started to investigate it. And next thing you know, they're reading Tom Woods' book Meltdown, or looking up Ron Paul, and they really do kind of get red pilled into the Austrian school. And some of those people now, I mean, that's 12 years ago, and they're still like libertarian anarcho capitalists because of that. So they definitely get a pickup, but I don't think that's going to convince everyone. The Soviet anthem is the best. No, false. Also, the Nationale is apparently copyrighted, so if you play it, you have to pay like dividends. Hmm. Nah, bro, the Austrians are correct a priori with apodictic certainty. Yes, there we go. You can't even try and if you even try and demonstrate that that's wrong. So Tortoise Dream and Jared, I've actually met both of you. I don't know if you know each other, but I've met Tortoise Dream many times and I've met Jared once. So consider yourselves acquainted. Uh, yeah, where's the inflation? Record stock prices. I think, will PorkFest be canceled? Never. No, you'll probably be able to buy a cure for coronavirus if you go to PorkFest. You'll just have to pay for it with Bitcoin. I won't be revealing his Reddit name. Fair enough. Well, I know his real name, but I won't be revealing that either. But yeah, I think of everyone who's commented today, you are the only two that I've met in person. Being forced to sing Australia's ridiculous anthem contributed to my becoming an ANCAP. Sybil, though, does Australia really have like nationalism? I have a feeling that it's not anything even remotely as bad as what we have in the United States. In a healthy economy, there would be savings to make changes. I feel, I don't know, I'm hesitant to make predictions like that. There's so many ways that it's been altered from a free market that we can't be 100% sure how it would be different. I'd be down to hang out with you, bro. Well, we'll both be in DC at the same time, Mark, so maybe we will. Was there ever a realistic path to victory for the Nazis? Well, I think that if Hitler had just never invaded Poland, he probably would go down in history as one of the greatest German politicians of all time. Uh, if there has to be a war, uh, the two things that I would, the one thing that I think would have made the biggest difference is if they had been much more, instead of saying we're going to genocide the Slavs and kill all the Slavs and make the Slavs our slaves, if they had said, look, Russia is a great country, Russia is a wonderful country, we've been friends in the past, we respect the Russians, but Bolshevism and Stalin are evil, and we want to get rid of them and give you guys back a free country, and they had tried to treat the Russians in that way, then that was the biggest fear that Stalin had. Stalin's biggest fear is that the Germans would set up a competing Soviet government, and then this would have been very difficult. This wouldn't have been a no-brainer, but I think that the pivot to the south, in hindsight, although there were good arguments at the time, has proven to be bad. So they invade on three army fronts, army groups, north, south, and center. They make really good progress in terms of absolute terms, but not necessarily really good progress in terms of what they need to get done because they have to finish the conquest that summer. And Army Group Center, which is heading towards Moscow. So Army Group Center is heading towards Moscow. Army Group North is heading towards Leningrad, and Army Group South is headed for like Rostov on Don, the Crimean Peninsula, the northern bank of the Black Sea. Um, Army Group Center made the most progress and made it. I think they made it to Minsk within a month, maybe less, maybe just 2 or 3 weeks. And at some point in October, it was way ahead of Army Group South and Army Group North, which is dangerous, but there are problems with that scenario for sure. And so Hitler made the decision to redirect it to help conquer the South, which they did, which resulted in some of the biggest battles in world history. The Germans captured like 600,000 Russians in the so-called Battle of Kiev, which I believe is still the record for the most captures ever in a single engagement in the history of the world, right? So they did well in the South, but then they delayed an advance on Moscow until the winter, and by then it was too late. The weather was too bad, and then the Russians were able to bring up massive reinforcements from Siberia, as people well know. And they got close to Moscow, I believe, within 10, 15 miles. But if they had just continued to go towards Moscow uh, that entire time and not tried to conquer the South, there's a chance they could have taken Moscow. And I do think that if the Soviet government had been forced to flee Moscow, it would have been a disaster for the Soviet regime's credibility, and it's likely that it could have collapsed. And there's evidence that Hitler was thinking about this. He would say stuff like, the foundations of Bolshevism are rotten. All we have to do is kick in the door and it's going to collapse. And I think that there was some truth that might have worked, but that's ended up not being what they did. The way they treated the Slavs was so genocidal that no Slav was going to really, well, very few. relatively few are going to take up their cause or believe that the Germans had any kind of philanthropic, humanitarian, pro-Russian bent, and so no, I think but that would have been the way to go, and I think their odds would have been a lot better. Still would have been a hard thing. Logistically, the logistics of conquering Moscow in one campaign in the summer like that would have been hard. But I'll recommend the book Forgotten Victories or Lost Victories. I think Lost Victories by Field Marshal Manstein. He does talk about that a little bit, and it seems like the dynamic movement at the time and the demoralization of the Soviet armies meant Army Group Center probably could have made it to Moscow that summer if they had not been diverted to the south. There's the answer there. Ba-ba-ba. Make fun of veterans here and you will see Australian nationalism, but yeah, I don't think it's as bad as most of the time. Your veterans who did what? Like invaded East Timor? Australia is nationalistic and the anthem is ridiculous. I think the nationalism of other Western countries is different than that in the United States. I feel like they pride themselves on having universal health care and being woke. And the United States prides itself on being the best country ever. So it's a little bit different. If Turkey had joined the Axis, they could have really helped the Germans. Two fronts alone. Yeah, that would have definitely really helped the Germans. That would have put a German army in the Middle East. That also would have tied down large Soviet forces in the Caucasus. And that also would have put the Russian oil fields in the Caucasus, in Baku, very close to Turkey and very close to a German army. So they would have been able to pivot into either the Caucasus or the Middle East, and that would have been hugely, hugely advantageous. The problem is, uh, could they have done that before the Russians had overwhelmed Anatolia? And I don't think the Turks were willing to bet their sovereignty on that. I think the Turks were very shrewd. I think they understood that in the long run, the odds were against Germany. They had sided with Germany in the First World War, and that turned out to be a huge mistake. And I think that they were not going to make the same mistake without knowing for sure what was going to happen. And I think they played their cards right. They ended up declaring war on Germany in the spring of 1945, as it turned out. If only Germany had won World War One. If only the United States had not been in World War One, that might have happened. Do you know about the Deluge period war between Sweden, Poland, Russia? How did Sweden get so powerful? You mean like the Great Northern War? Sweden was like a superpower. Sweden conquered all of the Baltic Sea, and then you have Charles X of Sweden who's fighting battles in the middle of the Ukraine. Um, if you're asking me how did Poland get so powerful, well, it got powerful relative to Eastern Europe. So there's this thing called the military revolution, which happens in Western Europe, where it happens with the Dutch. I think most people really do point this with the Dutch, but you could also say it maybe happened with the Spanish and the French, where you basically get professional armies that are capitally intensive, right? So you have artillery, you have firearms, they're professionally trained, right? They're not militia, they're not feudal knights, and it turns out these military forces are superior to other forces around the world. Now, there's actually a really interesting case study on this if you ever want to read The Lost Colony. That's about the Dutch colony in what is today Taiwan. Taiwan was a Dutch colony for, I think, 40 or 50 years in the 17th century. Obviously, the Dutch had successfully colonized what we now call Indonesia. It was then called the Dutch East Indies. They also colonized Taiwan. During the Qing takeover of China, the Qing takeover of China did not happen all at once. They took over Beijing very quickly, but then there was a long series, like 20 or 30 years of war to subdue the rest of southern China. And at one point, when the Ming forces were being defeated, they retreated to Taiwan and basically fought a war with the Dutch to take over Taiwan. So this was like a good case study of, I think that war was in the 1670s. So you have these Dutch forces fighting these basically Chinese, Ming slash Qing Chinese forces. And there's a good comparison there because the Dutch use soldiers, they use ships, and they use fortifications. And one of the conclusions of the book is that their soldiers weren't really that good, and their ships, though impressive, were not decisive, but their fortifications were unbelievable. We look at them now, they kind of look silly, but these Renaissance era, style fortresses with um, the crenellations and the funny shapes, the funny geometry, all that geometry was not for looks. That was to maximize the angle of fire, so you could position guns in certain way, so you could do infilade fire on attacking. The Dutch threw up some breastworks that just annihilated huge numbers of Chinese that the Chinese could do nothing about until they hired some Dutch people to build their own fortifications. So that's just an interesting aside. You'd probably like that book, The Lost Colonies. But um, the Swedish became part of this revolution. They adopted these military techniques. They became, um, understood them. They incorporated them. They used them in the 30 Years' War. So the 30 Years' War erupts, and about halfway through, Sweden suddenly enters the war and ends up conquering a big part of Germany. And it's difficult for them. I mean, they're fighting France. They're fighting the Habsburg Empire. Those are powerful enemies, so they didn't, mop the floor with them. But then when they went to go fight the Poles and the Russians, who were, a century behind militarily, they did pretty well. And so, yes, Sweden was like a Baltic superpower for about 150 years. There was also, I mean, Russia had a lot of turmoil. The fall of the Rurik dynasty, so Ivan the Terrible dies. He kills his own son before he dies. So after Ivan dies, the so-called Rurik dynasty of Russia ends, and there is a period called the Time of Troubles. So this Time of Troubles, and I'm going to get the dates wrong, but it lasted for like 20 years, and you basically didn't have a functioning state in Russia. And this is when, if you ever heard Poland, like Polish forces occupied Moscow at least once and maybe twice in this period. And so you had a period where Russia's neighbors were able to take advantage of her, and then later, that's when the Romanov dynasty was basically kind of elected to power. They were looking for a czar, and they picked the Romanovs. And it wasn't long after that they moved the capital to Petersburg. But yeah, they were just militarily just not they weren't as competitive until much later. I've heard a YouTube influencer suggest that Russia has been difficult to conquer throughout history because of the unforgiving terrain and harsh weather between Minsk and Moscow. Well, that's difficult for an east to west, or I'm sorry, a west to east invasion, but not a west east to west. So Russia's been conquered by the Mongols a couple times. Russia was conquered by Poland. Russia's been conquered. Um, uh, Moscow was burned by Napoleon. So uh, the Russians have been the victims of many, many campaigns, and their vast size has helped recently, but they don't really have any big national barriers either. These rivers, the Dniester, the Bug, the Dnieper, they don't really stop anybody. And so big parts of their empire have been chopped away. They've lost many wars with Turkey, for instance, and with the Tartars, and with again, the Poles, the Germans. They lost wars with the Japanese, for Christ's sake. So no, I don't know if that's really true. This happened. There's famous examples of that happening, but there's other things going on. Like when Germany is invading Russia, it's also fighting a war against the UK. It's already fought a war against France and Poland. Same with Napoleon. So yes, the sheer size of the area is logistically a huge challenge, especially if we're talking about modern war where they're trying to occupy the entire territory. But just marching an army across, that's very doable. I mean, Napoleon did it, Charles X did it, the Mongols did it repeatedly, the Turks could do it. There were Russian peasant armies that did it. It was very common for there to be uprisings of peasants in Moscow, in Russia, that were able to do it. So, yeah, I'm not sure. I think that's a simplistic way to look at it. Well, got to get back to work. Great to catch on this live content. Keep up the content. Thanks, Ron. Nice to hear from you. Time of Troubles ended in 1613. Mikhail Romanov, the great nephew of Tsarina Anastasia, wife of Ivan the Terrible, was anointed. There we go. Did you see that Putin say that because they are modifying the Russian constitution, his presidential mandate could count should be set to zero? Why do they even pretend at this point? Like, you just say, I'm the president for life. I feel like there's nothing to stop him from doing that, so that's what he's going to do. They have as far as I know, there's no contrary source of power, no alternate source of wealth or the United States is kind of interesting in that it's got a multipolar system. We just have multiple areas that are very rich and powerful. So yes, maybe DC is powerful and New York is powerful, but so is Chicago, and so is LA, and so is Houston, and so is Seattle, and so is Detroit, and so is Miami, and you just have all these, and you can't really run roughshod over everything. You have to have some kind of consent. Putin should just go for czar at this rate. Yeah, I think that that's fair. I mean, he's filling that role. There's this historical. You want a strong person in charge, and so he should just say that's what he's doing. Is Putin the longest serving Russian Soviet leader since the Russian Revolution? That I don't know. Stalin would be 22 to 53, so that's 31 years. So I don't think he's been there that long. No, Stalin's definitely longer than Putin because Stalin was 22 to 53. So he hasn't beat Stalin yet. Because 32 years ago would be, I don't even know. Uh, yeah, 1988. Yeah, he hasn't been in power since 1988. Putin should marry at least one of the surviving Romanovs to strengthen his claim. He'd have to have children by them. They'd have to have a boy. He'd have to groom him to be his spawn, but then he'd basically be asking for his son to be killed whenever he died, which is probably what happened. It'd be like Game of Thrones, but with vodka. But they'd still have ice zombies. The czar of all the nukes. And I listed Stalin there, but I don't know. Brezhnev was in power for quite a while. Khrushchev was in power for at least 12, 13 years. Uh, I watch your videos on foreskin restoration, and I'm curious to know how and when did you discover that the foreskin is a normal part of the male body? Well, when I was taught about circumcision, which was in fifth grade in health class, I mean, it's interesting because they do basically say, well, they're cutting this away. The implication is that it is natural. So I guess you understand that it's natural, but I was taught that it was vestigial, it had no purpose, and that it was a source of a lot of trouble, and so it just made sense to remove it. So a very strict, this is medically necessary or at least medically beneficial, and I didn't really question that. Um, First time I actually saw a foreskin was when I was 17, and then I did not see another one until I was 30. And that is when I discovered that it was pretty normal and it actually had a function. So it was from meeting guys. It was, and I do think if you look at the restoration movement and the intactivist movement, it is disproportionately gay. It's not exclusively gay, but it's disproportionately gay. And I think that's the big reason because a gay guy is much more likely to encounter a foreskin, at least secondhand, and is going to have a much better understanding of its functions and its capabilities and its benefits relative to a straight guy who is either going to never have any contact at all or maybe has only seen some or seen none depending on his situation, right? I think most straight guys have never seen them. Maybe if they shower a lot or they're in a situation like that, they see some, but they won't see that many, and they certainly won't be getting to know them that well if they're straight. Do you think Macron is gay? His wife is 24 years his senior. No idea. Never heard that he is. I know gay guys in France, and I've never heard that speculated, so probably not. What do you think what do you think it would take to make America intact again? I think that huge step, a huge step would be if the AAP and a few other organizations not only stopped recommending it, but actually said that it was not a good idea. As soon as that happens, it will be taken off of not only Medicaid in all the states, it will be taken off of insurance in all the states. And doctors will no longer be able to say that it's recommended for this. Now, that won't end it right away, but that will end it very quickly. I think the rates will plummet at that point, and it won't go to zero, but I think you could see it dropping to like 20% or 15% very quickly in that case. Because that's the only leg. We don't have a religious reason to do it for Gentiles. So the only reason it's being done ostensibly is because of these health reasons. And so if they could just say these health reasons are not justified, which by the way, most medical organizations around the world are saying that already, they really are twisting the logic to arrive at the conclusion that it's the quote benefits outweigh the cost, which is the current phrasing. So if we could just have, and we almost had like Dr. Spock is a good example. Dr. Spock was the guru of infant care. He recommended circumcision early in his career in the 50s and 60s, and then by the 70s, by the late 70s, you can actually find interviews where he says this. He goes, the evidence now is that it's not necessary, and as such, it should not be done because it's serious to do surgery on an infant, and unless you have a really good reason to do it, not just a really good reason, but like a necessary reason, you shouldn't do it. And circumcision certainly doesn't meet that standard. Unfortunately, he's just one influential guy, and that didn't get a lot of play at the time. So yes, we need the AAP and other organizations, but especially the AAP, to basically change their policy statements on it. The problem is the AAP is stocked full of pro-circumcision men who are, for financial and psychological and liability reasons, unlikely to ever question it, and who are obviously extremely biased. I mean, many of them are Jewish. There's evidence that some of them actually have or have had, because the one I'm thinking of is dead now, but like circumcision fetishes where they would watch videos of babies getting circumcised for their pleasure, which is a thing. It's also a thing for Brian Morris, who's probably the biggest proponent of circumcision in the world, who's Australian, for all you Australian people out there. So, hi, I learned about circumcision in the fifth grade too. Yes, and I don't know that I ever, like, I knew it was a thing. I don't think I was ever taught about it before that. You've been in the shower for an hour and a half? You must be so wrinkly. Apparently, melting ice in Antarctica has revealed a new uncharted island. So, this is the secret plan, Tortoise. We are causing global warming just so that we can create an anarchist utopia on on an ungoverned island. In California, where I live, we are the first state to ban Medicaid funding of circs since somewhere around 1985, and I believe this number of states that have banned it for Medicaid is like 16 states at this point. And there's ongoing efforts to increase that. They're doing that in Massachusetts, I know for sure, probably some other states. That's a no-brainer, in my opinion. It's actually listed as a cosmetic procedure on Medicaid, and Medicaid is only supposed to be for necessary medical procedures, not cosmetic ones. And that will drop the rates immediately. So California already has relatively low rates of circumcision. Uh, bu- 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 AA came out in favor of female circumcision in 2012, but reversed opinion after internal backlash. Yes, and there's good evidence, AAP. Yes, they did, and I think the reason they did is because they see the logical and intellectual connection between male circumcision and female circumcision. They realize that intactivists were saying, look, you can't cut a girl, so you can't cut a boy, and they would rather you be able to cut a girl than to stop cutting boys, is what it comes down to. I think a lot of them are so into the idea of male circumcision, and again, of infants. All the arguments they make, by the way, the health arguments, are things that you could do to an adult. So why not wait for someone to be an adult to make that decision? But I think they realized that most people, if they live to be an adult, will not want to get circumcised. It's only going to be a small minority who make that decision, which is not satisfying for some reason, because I can't think of a medical reason. So I think there probably really are psychological reasons for that. And so they said, okay, well, there's this contradiction. So they got rid of the contradiction, but they got rid of it in the wrong way by saying, let's accept both. And these are actually the legal arguments that the pro-female circumcision organizations in the United States are making. You have these Houthi Muslim minorities who their version of female circumcision is less invasive than the male version of male circumcision. So with male circumcision, they remove the entire prepuce, so the head is completely exposed. With female circumcision, they do a ritual nick, drawing a drop of blood, which is, if you want to say that's bad, fair enough. I agree that it is, but it's not nearly as invasive as male circumcision. So their argument, and it's quite a logical one, is if we can do this to our boys, we should be able to do this to our girls. And equal protection of the law under the Constitution makes that so. And the federal law was actually struck down because it was unconstitutional on the grounds that uh, the federal government can't make laws about that. But then the states are now doing it, but that's going to also be challenged. And the AAP, in its rigorous efforts to defend male circumcision, was willing to defend female circumcision as a result, as a tactic of that. And yes, they got a huge backlash and they came back. Pretty sure ANCAPs would build their own floating island. Seasteading is still a thing. Yes, it is. Seasteading, that was so 2008. Come on. All right, guys, it is 10:30. There's still a few more things I want to do before I go to bed. But if you haven't checked out, look for the link in the description for the podcast. It's different stuff than I put on here. It's free, so you can just go listen to that. There's no commercials or anything. And then also, if you're into communal showers, check out the communal shower subreddit. It's still a growing community. It's been doing well. And we always want new people there. And yeah, I think that'll be it. Thank you all for stopping by, and I hope you have a great night.